specific. So, for example, if you cannot get a permit or get a passport, although you may live in urban areas for many, many years, but you're still being classified as a rural resident. So this is different from what we observe, for example, in the West. In the West, if, for example, I live in Manchester, if I move to Warwick, and then I become a Warwick resident. But in China, it's not possible because you have this hukou system in place. And for example, if I work in the UK for 5 years, the current law will allow me to become a permanent resident in the UK, and then after another year, I can become a British citizen. So I can get a British passport under the current law. But in China, even if you migrate, for example, from rural areas to urban areas, and then you work there, live there for more than 10 years, you are still being classified as a rural resident. It's unless you get a visa, not get a visa, get a passport, get an urban passport. But it is almost impossible for many, many people. So previously, there were only two ways to do that. Firstly, is to enter university, and then you will be granted urban hukou. And then secondly, you may enter military or some other formal jobs. But it's very, very difficult. And then now, this system still exists, although to a less extent. But hukou constraint is still there. So now, let's talk about inequality. I give you this table. You can say from here, this is Gini coefficient for rural in 1988, 1995, and 2003. Look at rural. We have this inequality measures. Yes? And we say during early years of the reform, China was more or less an equal society. Rural was okay, urban very equal. Okay? Along these two lines, you can say inequality increases both in urban and in rural. But now, this is one thing I want to say. And secondly, you may want to observe this one. You say, within urban areas, the inequality is okay, and within rural areas, it is okay. But at the national level, this inequality is much bigger than within urban and within rural. Why this is the case? Why we observe a smaller Gini and then a smaller Gini in urban and in rural, but we observe a very big Gini in a national level? Any ideas? So, it is because the gap on the divide between urban and rural. So although urban is about equal and then rural is equal, but there is a very big gap between the two who drives this national Gini to be bigger than other. So this means that urban-rural divide is a very big contributor to the overall inequality in China. Of course, inequality has something to do with inter-rural and inter. I have a paper on this, and if you're interested in, you can download it on the website and to have some detailed study. So first of all, to give you some intuitive idea about inequality and urban-rural divide. So this is Shanghai. When you're watching TV, you know all these stories: Shanghai Expo, Beijing Olympics. You see all those first stories. But when we look at Western province in China, this scenario still exists to some extent. Do you know what the people was doing here? Any idea? Yes, they don't have livestock, so they have to rely on their kids to do those. Of course, this picture is a little bit old, but still it represents the livelihood of a Western rural region. Okay, so of course we go back to the Shanghai again, and then you say all those fancy buildings and the shopping centers, shopping malls. But when you come to rural, you know what this paper is doing here? Yes, so this grandpa sent this case to school on the way, wash his face just on the way to school, because they were unable to, because sometimes the source of the water is far away from home. It is very expensive and very costly for them to fetch water to home and then wash face. So, and of course from this picture you can see this is obviously winter. So this gives you an idea of the scale of urban-rural divide. Now, in this paper, we divide those divides into into 9 dimensions, and then we'll say gaps have implications not only directly for well-being but indirectly through economic channels. Okay, now let's look at all these gaps one by one. Firstly, to give you an idea of the evolution of rural-urban income gap. So first of all, we look at income gaps. You can see this is the nominal income of rural areas. Okay, from 1978, the very beginning of the reform, up to 2009. So last year's data. And this is rural average income. Of course, a lot of information has been lost by averaging rural income, but this will give you a general idea of the level of rural average income. Okay? And then this is average urban income. So you look at this side, nominal income, and then the gap between the two is plot as this one by looking at the right axis. So you say this is urban-rural income ratio. So you can say at the very beginning there was some gap at roughly 2.5 times. So that means urban average income is 2.5 times higher than rural average income. And then it dropped a little bit at the very beginning of the reform because of the household responsibility system. Because as you know, Chinese reform started from rural area. So when they introduced this rural reforms, rural income goes up significantly. You cannot say from here because of scale, but it actually goes up very significantly from here. So that this gap was urban stagnant to some extent. So you can see a very big jump in terms of gap. But those increases along the line. Only exception is here because you experience very big retrenchment in urban regions because ISOE's reform, so state-owned enterprise reform, led by the Chinese government, dumped a lot of people. Okay, so this is a general idea. You can say constantly urban income is much higher, many times higher than rural income. It is large and it is increasing. Normally, we say there is urban-rural gap in any country. For example, in the UK and in America, urban average income is normally higher, but not to this extent. Okay, so there are something behind this, apart from the natural forces. We'll discuss this one later on. So, of course, when you read newspapers, when you read all these journals, even academic journals, you have to be aware of several issues when they talk about urban-rural divide. Some people want to say that, okay, the urban nominal income is much higher than rural income, but the gap is not that high. It's not as high as the figure shows because of this. Because the cost of living in urban regions is much bigger than the cost of living in rural areas. However,